Welcome to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, where we equip pastors to take their churches from declining to thriving by pointing them to a new future and a new hope. Join us weekly for encouragement and practical advice in your pastoring journey.
Okay, I've got a question for you. Oh, wait.
What?
Before I ask you the question.
I'm listening.
This is Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dan Hurst. Kyle Bueermann is sitting over there to my right.
Howdy.
And you may be wondering where Halleck is. Halleck is on sabbatical, and he wouldn't take us with him.
He wouldn't. We asked.
We said, okay, we'll come to you.
That's right,
No.
wherever you are, but he wouldn't tell us where he was.
Some kind of a friend he is.
I know.
Let me ask you a question now. Have you ever served on a committee that actually accomplished anything?
No. No.
I know
Is that-
committees are important.
That's not the point of a committee, is it? I thought we were just supposed to talk about stuff.
The problem is, if one did, then you'd have to have a committee to study what happened so
Yeah,
that
well,
you
that's
could
true.
duplicate it.
Yeah.
So the point of this today is Chuck Lawless's article, 10 Indications that Church Committees Are Out of Control.
Yeah.
I just spent the last many hours with a church vision committee. And it's a large committee. I have preached revivals with fewer people in them than this committee.
Really? Oh,
yes,
man.
I think there's.
Well, how do they get anything done?
They don't much. I think it's a dozen people on this committee.
Wow.
And so it's hard for them to even all get together because every time we want to plan another meeting, there's 2 or 3 that can't be there that night.
Yeah.
So we end up being weeks apart for these meetings. It's just an unwieldy weight of having. And then this church has lots of committees that have to talk to each other. And I've just realized how dysfunctional the decision-making process is with committees. Mm-hmm. And this is all very fresh. So I was meeting with the church, with the vision team, and this church is willing to adopt this church because it's a declining, dying church. And at the invitation of the vision committee, the potential adopting church met with them. And one of the questions from the vision team was, if you do adopt us, we would sure like to keep our current committee system.
Oh, man. Plays right into what we're talking about today.
Plays right into what we're talking about.
We're talking about indications that church committees are out of control. And, you know, this is the amazing thing. It seems to me that per capita, the smaller the church, the more committees they
I would
have.
agree. No, I would agree. I would totally agree.
And when you're working with churches in decline, as the numbers of people have declined, the numbers of committees have not.
No,
Right.
and we talk about you anesthetize the pain of death,
Yep.
and this is true of this church I'm working with right now. You anesthetize the pain of death with an overabundance of activity.
Yes.
So as long as we stay busy, as long as we have committees and we're meeting and we're doing things, we really can't be dying.
Yeah.
But you can. And frankly, if you look around at the newer churches that are reaching people and growing, they have fewer committees, if any at all. Many of them, in fact, again, I was meeting recently with one of the largest churches in a 4 or 5 state region and a church that was about to close. And the church that was about to close had a significant number of committees. But the larger church, they asked the larger church, they said, how many committees do you have? And this is a church of several thousand people, 32 full-time staff. And the senior pastor said, we don't have any standing committees.
Wow.
Our elders appoint committees as necessary for the task necessary, but we don't have standing committees.
Wow.
And the smaller, declining church couldn't put their mind around how would you function as a church without a number of standing committees. It's interesting, folks, how church governance varies so much now in Southern Baptist life. But formerly, we were very much a committee-led church.
Yes.
Okay? And that's very much in our culture. There was a time when that church was probably 400 or 500 people in the 1960s and 50s and 70s, and committees functioned relatively well, but committees don't function as well as they used to. Partially because people are so much more busy, it's hard to get everybody together like you used to. Anyway.
Or unqualified to serve on that particular
So let's
committee.
get to the article, because it's a lot more interesting than my rambling.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about how you know if a committee is out of control.
How about this? When there are more committees in the church constitution than there are people in the church.
That's the thing that amazes me, that the committees would actually be written
Okay, well,
into
here they
the
are. You
Constitution.
have a benevolence committee, you have a house and grounds committee, you have a preschool committee, you have a music committee, you have a flower committee, you have a fellowship committee, you have
this
personnel.
is only a 20-minute
you have a
podcast,
personnel
by the way.
committee. You have a budget and finance committee.
And
I'm serious.
yes, and I served at a church where in the bylaws it said that no person could serve on more than one committee. But we had like 70 people in the church,
Yeah.
Oh, no.
and probably 20 committees.
Oh, my.
I mean, it wasn't possible. So we were out of sync with our bylaws because of the structure of the church.
No.
But
yeah.
when the church depends,
The missions
so
committee.
much- Oh yeah, okay, can't
You
forget
got
that.
a missions committee?
Yeah. I
Lord's
thought that was a
Supper committee.
WMU.
No, well, that's no. A lot of churches will have a missions committee or missions promotion committee. No, I would be interesting. Put in the show notes or put in the don't we have something? Yeah. Email me and tell me, replant at
What your committee
nam.net.
is.
I want to see your committee structure in your church.
Yeah, how many committees?
How
do you
many
have?
committees? We will give an award for the church with most committees.
Oh, there you are.
All right,
Oh,
we'll send
mercy.
you a mug or something
Oh,
if you have
goodness.
the most committees.
Well, the issue is, and we've kind of alluded to it, and that is that when churches are so structured and dependent on their constitution that they'd rather die than change the way they've always done things, because the
Dude.
committees may have been functional
Okay,
at one
that's
point.
that's where I live, and people always ask me, "Hey, Mark, how you doing?" And I always say, "I'm doing great," and I'm not always doing great because I spend a majority of my time dealing with churches that I love, full of people that are the bride of Christ, and I love them. But some churches, primarily the ones I deal with, many of them would rather die than change the way things have been done.
Yeah.
And you go, really? And I say, absolutely. Because if they're given a choice to say, here's somebody that can come in and adopt you or you know, oh, you're talking about taking us over. No, I'm talking about picking you up. I'm talking about lifting you up. I'm talking about saying, you've been praying that God would do a work here in this church. We've come to do it.
Yeah.
And they say, well, not that way.
Yeah.
And see, part of the problem is those committees give me a place to belong. In other words, sometimes as older adults, you know, even my age, which I am older now, and you are too, our kids, our grown-up adult kids, talk about us like we're not even in the room. You know, Dad can't hear as well as he used to. Hey, Dad's sitting right here. What are you talking about?
Heard that.
I heard that. And you know, you get older and people don't pay attention to you anymore. Maybe you've retired from your work. You maybe used to organize, maybe used to do project management, or you were a construction engineer or a school teacher, but now nobody pays any attention to you. But I'm on the finance committee at my church, and we're not going to get that copier lease renewed unless I look it over.
Yeah.
And so that sense that my voice matters because I'm on this committee is where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah. And if your church is dying, it's dying because it won't change. And
Right.
and a committee is a pretty good example of, or too many committees in the church is a pretty good example of that.
And what I said a moment ago, and I realize we're not going to get through this list probably, what I said a moment ago about the church that had no standing committees and the church that had lots of standing committees, the world is changing at such a rapid rate now, you need to be able to pivot quickly. And you can't always do that with standing committees. All right?
Oh, exactly right. Here's another one. When the church has not examined or revised or strengthened its committee structure in years, decades,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it worked for us before. It can work again.
Because in some ways they feel like, well, the Constitution says we have to do that, and we don't want to change our Constitution because we don't want to open up that Pandora's box. It takes too much work. So a lot of times they end up not filling the committees, and then they're not paying attention to their Constitution and bylaws anyway.
Well,
I mean,
we're talking about this blog from Chuck Lawless, and his insight is kind of painful because we're all or have or are dealing with these very issues. Here's another one. When the progress of the church gets bogged down in competing or controlling committees.
Yes. 10 ways you know your committees are out of control. I grew up in a time of church council was the main governance of our churches. I don't think that's true in most new churches. I don't hear very many new church plants that have a church council.
Right.
But when I was a young pastor and grew up in church, my dad was a pastor, we had a church council. The church council was made up, are you ready, of the chairman of the various committees. Yes. And we had library committee, chairman of the library committee, chairman of the House and Grounds committee, chairman of finance committee, chairman of budget committee.
What does the library committee do?
It runs the library.
Okay.
So you were chairman of the youth committee, chairman of the missions committee, chairman of the benevolence committee. So you were on the church council because you were chairman of committee. Well, that sounds good, except when the church council gets together, it's kind of like a bunch of silos. We all are protecting our calendar, our agenda, our budget. Yeah. We all compete for communication in the church. It creates not a oneness, but really a separateness to have all these different committees competing for attention and budget and those kinds of things.
Well, then add to that another issue is that when one committee is the power broker of the entire church.
The finance committee.
Yeah.
It really is not the library committee driving the thing. It's the finance committee or the personnel committee.
Or the personnel. Yeah.
Those are the ones that drive it. Yeah.
And those are coveted positions by some of these churches. We'll talk about that
Right.
in just a moment. But, if one committee is basically the power broker of the entire church, and by the way, it could be with good intentions. Yeah. These could be really sweet people. They just take this job, this committee, as really this church is going to die if we don't do our job.
I'm gonna lay something in here, and it is what it is. There's going to be some group in your church that has leadership power, either defined or undefined. And some people freak out by having elders. Oh, we can't have that. You've got elders. They're just not called that. There's some group in your church that makes the decisions along with your pastor. Is it your staff? Is it your deacons? Is it your church council? Is it your chairman of your finance and budget committee? Somebody's making the decisions. You better be certain that the ones making it are called by the Lord to make it, are anointed by Him, and not just taking the role of a committee chairman.
And by the way, we don't always call them committees.
That's true.
Sometimes they're teams.
They're teams, but it's the same thing.
Sometimes they're the leadership family.
That's right.
All right. So here's another one. When most committee members can't tell you what they do. Can't tell you what the committee is about.
Yeah, I like this. Their
Hopefully
selection
this is not the finance committee.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, their selection to fill a seat on a committee doesn't mean that the church leaders explained to that person what they were going to do, how they would do it, or what would be required to do it.
Yeah.
We just need people to serve. I was at a business meeting. I was preaching at a small church one Sunday, and after church they had a business meeting and a luncheon, so I stayed, and it was they were filling their committees. It was like their annual nominating committee. Oh, there's another one, nominating committee. There's a nominating committee meeting. So the nominating committee had listed all and they got to it was a benevolence committee. They had 2 people on it, and they needed 3. So I'll never forget this dear, sweet church clerk was standing there with a spiral notebook, and she had all the committee names there. And she said, "Well, we need one more person to serve on the benevolence committee. Who will do that? Who will do that? Anybody? Karen? Okay, put Karen down for benevolence committee." I thought, maybe Karen knows what the benevolence committee is. Maybe she doesn't. But that's probably not the best way to fill a committee is in business meeting where you just ask somebody to fill it in. But we do it. And some of you listening to me have heard that being done.
Well, I preached in a little church in South Carolina a few years ago. And I mean a little church in a little town in South Carolina. And it was so little that...
How little was it?
It was so little that they had 6 people on the evangelism committee, which basically was about a fourth of the church.
Yeah.
And they were on the evangelism committee. Yeah. And I said, so I would ask them, I said, so what is because this is a little town, maybe 500-600 people, that's it. I said, so what does the evangelism committee do? And they kind of looked at each other, and they said, well, we keep the track rack full.
That's right.
That was
that's it. Doing the Lord's work.
I guess.
Keep that track rack full.
So anyways, if your committee has people on it that don't know what they're doing, you've got a dysfunctional committee.
That's
there.
right.
Another one is when committees actually haven't met or functioned for years.
The church still elects committees, but they don't really meet. I always heard this when I was a kid, again, and young man and young pastor. We'd have monthly business meetings, whether we needed them or not. And in the monthly business meeting, we would always have, do we have a report from the finance committee? Well, they usually gave a report, right? Here's what we spent. Have a report from the missions committee? No. Have a report from the benevolence committee? No, we didn't meet. I mean, you go down all these committees, and usually nobody was even there from the committees, right?
Yeah.
But we listed them all.
Yeah, because it has to go in the minutes.
Right, but we're not meeting. We're not doing anything, but we've elected them. And when you, oh my word, listen to this. Turn the podcast up. Pull over to the side of the road. Listen, when you have committees and those committees don't meet or don't do anything, wow, you will drive true leaders crazy. They will not stay in your church.
Right.
They will see this as a waste of their time. They will leave your church, and you will have a leaderless church. You cannot waste people's time by asking to serve on a committee, and then those committees never meet.
I would say I've actually heard this, like when it comes to the nominating committee, somebody asks, well, what does the committee do? Well, we don't really know. We don't even really think they meet. We just need somebody's name.
We need
to
somebody's
fill
name,
the sheet,
yeah.
right? To fill
Or the
the
nominating
spot.
committee, what they'll say is, well, we just try to fill out the other committees. I mean, putting people on committees ought to be a prayerful activity of some church leadership.
good.
Done one off. Okay, we're getting off topic here. All right, so we're back to Chuck Lawless's 10 reasons committees are out of control.
All right. Well, number 7.
Yes.
Or do you want to review?
Well, let's review. I like to review. You know me. Number 1. Okay, so what's the first reason committees are out of control? Oh, number 1. When there are more committees than there are people in the church. When the church hasn't revised any of its committee structure over the years. When the progress of the church gets bogged down by competing committees. Mm-hmm. When the committee becomes the real power broker, one committee of the entire church. And when committee members can't even tell you what their committee does. And committees don't actually meet or function very well. And number 7, this is a new one, when they meet, they really don't do anything. They meet to talk.
Yep.
And that's about it. They don't ever, someone said it's like a bunch of old men who like to meet and talk about fishing, but never go fishing. So you have an evangelism committee, you talk about evangelism, but you don't accomplish it. Or you talk about these things. So there's a sense of, if we've talked missions committee, if we talk about it, like if we talk about it, we've done it. No, you've just talked about it.
Right.
And sometimes you talk it into the ground.
And sometimes you're on a committee that meets behind closed doors.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's an important thing, and all they do is talk about that
talk about
important thing, whatever it may be, and then nothing ever comes of
And
those
then they become
discussions.
inwardly protective of the information, and it just becomes very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Okay.
And another danger point along this very same line,
Yes.
though, is when you have committees that are appointed by a person, even if the person is you as the pastor, and you appoint the committee,
Yeah.
but you are running the committee.
Yeah.
Why do you even need a
I
committee?
know. You're just wanting to rubber stamp what you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
know.
understand that.
I don't either. That's what my team does. They rubber stamp what I say, don't you? You know what? I get this. This is like free flow of thought here from Mark Clifton today. You know, you ever think about the personal pronoun we use in ministry? I remember I had a mentor one time that told me, and I've tried to be very careful about it. When you're talking about your staff, don't ever use the personal pronoun. I don't like to say my team at NAM. I like to say the team I serve at NAM, or the team that serves with me at NAM. So even your local church, I know you could say my staff. I hear pastors say all the time, I love having my staff. Why don't you say I love having the staff at our church? I think just be careful about the use of the personal pronoun in ministry. I like to be cautious about that. So I just said my team at NAM, but I try to say the team I serve with, or our team.
I mean, everywhere I go, I say I'm here as a personal representative of Mark Clifton.
Oh,
for this.
well, isn't that special? But in my church's budget, it's our budget. I just think we need to be careful about the personal pronoun. All right, where are we? Number 8. Go ahead, Dan.
When committee membership becomes a goal for church members who want power and control.
And that has shown, the reason they want that is because they see that's where the real decisions are made. That's where the real power is held, which it shouldn't be. It should be with a group of biblical leaders, whether that's pastors or deacons or elders. It shouldn't be in committee members. That shouldn't be the power of the church, in my opinion.
So where
in
are
my
these,
opinion, I could be wrong, but probably not.
What are these? Like where would these
The
tend
finance
to be?
committee.
Finance, personnel,
Personnel and finance primarily.
Deacons?
Huh?
Deacons?
No,
Which
deacons
is-
don't really have a committee. I think in some smaller churches, you guys know what I'm talking about. Man, the finance committee, I did a consult with a church, and we did where we gave a survey out, and it was supposed to be an anonymous survey. All right. Well, not anonymous. They were going to put but it wasn't supposed to be read publicly. Okay. And so it was. But I was there that evening, and the chairman of this vision team wanted to read them out loud, and I said, I don't think we should do that. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. And so all of a sudden he starts reading, and this was the different views of what's going on in the church. But he said, I won't read their names. Okay, don't read their names. So he was reading, I think our church needs help with this. I think our church needs help with that. And then he gets up there and he starts reading. And I'm sitting next to the pastor. And he goes, he's reading, he said, as pastor of this church, so he said, I can't buy a box of Kleenex unless our finance committee approves it. And I'm going, well, we know who wrote that one. And it was pretty awkward. But he couldn't. I mean, the finance committee ran everything, and he couldn't have any freedom at all. So I think sometimes in those committee structures, even the pastor is hindered.
Yeah.
He can't even lead unless the person in charge of the finance committee says he can do it.
Right.
So I think that's probably where a lot of it is. A lot of the power would be is in that finance committee.
Well, along with that, it's when the church still has business meetings, so the committees can report.
Yeah, I already talked about that. The only reason we have a monthly business meeting is to report of the committees, and the committees usually have nothing to report.
That's exactly right. Although I served at a church, which shall go nameless, that had when I went to the church, it was a very small church, normative, for rural churches.
Yeah.
And they had a number of committees, and they tried to. I said, so how do you decide who's on the committee? Well, we try to get everybody involved.
Oh, that's always good, whether they're really prayed up or not.
And so I said, so how do you select who's on the the nominating committee, or who's going to be on the Well, they said, well, we have deacons, and we have trustees, and we need some committees so that women can serve.
Yes, okay.
And I thought, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
So the purpose of the committees was so that women could serve in the church. And it was like, oh, no, come on.
Yeah, so it's not about doing the work that needs to be done. It's about a structure that is there for its own reason, and it doesn't accomplish the work. It doesn't help you. Look, we're talking to people who understand what we're talking about here. Church committees are not necessarily the most efficient way to accomplish work if you don't stay on top of them and make sure that they have clearly defined roles and they meet on a clearly defined reason. They meet for clearly defined reasons and accomplish clearly defined things. Otherwise, they just go off onto their own, and it just bogs down. And
plus,
we've
they
all
have to be
seen that.
accountable.
And they got to be accountable.
They got to be accountable to to a body anyway. Which brings us to the final one.
When no one in church will publicly question the value of these committees.
We can't cancel that.
I know.
I know. We've always had that.
We've always had those committees. And they don't realize there may be a better way of accomplishing this work than having all of these standing committees. And I think, guys, we're not talking about a dictatorship where the pastor says what he says goes, and don't hear what we're not saying. We're not saying you shouldn't have lay involvement, just the opposite. We are saying, listen to me, you listening? You should have lay involvement. You should have involvement of your whole congregation. But your structure needs to mean something. It needs to matter. It needs to have a reason. It needs to encourage people to truly be leaders. It's not a meeting just to meet. And it's not a structure just to have a structure. And it's not a structure that might have been good 2 decades ago, but today doesn't function well at all, and we don't want to re-examine it. And it's not a place for little power brokers to find their own little kingdom and their own little world and compete against one another. And it's not a place to put the most unprayed up carnal Christian into some role in the church just because they come all the time. We want to make sure everybody has a voice. That's not a reason to put them on a committee either. You should only have people on leadership in your church who are called by the Lord to be in that place, who see it as their ministry and it is truly meaningful and not just something they're doing to fill a name on a slot.
All right, let's. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so committees can be really good servants for the church. Like, they can accomplish good things. The danger comes when committees dictate the structure of the church, the ministries, what can and can't happen.
Right.
They can operate well. The danger here is when Well, when they
they're
go
out of control.
Yeah.
They're out of control. And
Yep.
they're too big.
Yep.
They're unwieldy. And they carry too much power. And they don't work together. And they don't have a central sense of passion for the whole church. They get siloed into their own little world and create their own little kingdoms. Or they don't do anything. They're just in name only, or they just meet and talk and get nothing accomplished.
All right, let's close by letting me throw a curveball at you guys.
Okay, go ahead.
Both of you.
Yeah.
All right? We've got pastors listening to this right now who are saying,
Well, I hope
I
so.
get it.
Yeah.
How do I make the change?
Well, you just tell them you listen to a podcast and we're not supposed to have these committees anymore.
That'll do it.
And you can call Mark Clifton at
brothers.
555.
I mean, seriously, if they're so entrenched, it's obviously, you can't do it overnight.
No.
It's a process.
Yeah.
And where do you begin?
I would begin by consolidating committees.
Yes.
Is there a way we can consolidate 3 or 4 of these committees into one? And can we have some of them only? One of the things I did, we had a fellowship committee and we have a benevolence committee. And I said, you know what? We don't need standing committees. Can we find one person to be a benevolence go person? And that way, when someone to be we had bereavement committee. That was the committee that would take care of funeral meals, those kinds of things. Rather than having a standing committee, can we just have a person in charge of that? And then when there needs to be a funeral meal, they're just the one that sort of calls some folks up that week and say, can you help us get this done? We don't need standing committees for everything. Maybe you just need an identifiable person. And so we kind of reduce some committees. So our only standing committees are those that really have monthly work to do, maybe like the House and Grounds and the Finance and the Personnel. But these others can just be work teams that only work when they need to. We can talk about how you might begin to restructure like that rather than overnight get rid of all of them. You're always going to need some sort of standing, probably organizational committee of finance or personnel or something. But all these others probably could be done by just having someone be responsible for that work, and then when it needs to be done, they could call some folks and say, hey, could we get together a fellowship meal? Could we get together, help with a bereavement meal, something along those lines?
All right. Well, you went through the litany of all of the different committees.
There's a bunch of them
that we've all encountered.
Yeah.
We have a committee that I guarantee you have never
What is that?
had in
What
any
is
of
that?
your churches.
Probably not. What is it?
We have. I'm not making this up.
You're not.
No. We have the Fold and Chat Committee.
The Fold and Chat Committee?
Yes, and it's their job every Sunday morning to get together and fold all the bulletins.
Okay.
And that's what they do every Sunday morning, the Fold and Chat Committee.
Fold and Chat Committee.
And they're
But hey,
functional.
they accomplish something.
At
every
least they
Sunday.
accomplish something.
They're functional. They're totally functional.
That makes sense.
You've been listening to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, and sponsored by the North American Mission Board, for which we are so grateful. And we are especially grateful for you for listening and putting up with us and allowing us to do this at least a couple of times a week, sometimes 3. Please subscribe if you're given that option on the platform where you listen to these podcasts. And feel free to send us a note. Send us a note, chat with us, and while you're folding next Sunday morning.
Thanks for joining us today on Revitalize and Replant. This podcast is brought to you by the North American Mission Board, where we help dying or struggling churches regain health for the glory of God and the good of their communities. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. To learn more about becoming a replanting pastor or to explore resources about revitalization for your own church, visit churchreplanters.com.